Solomon Webb was 37 years old when his wife walked out of a marriage he had spent 8 years building, and she took $2 million with her on the way. He drove a domestic sedan. He kept an office in a nondescript building near Peachtree Street in Atlanta with no sign on the door that indicated what actually happened inside it. Her friends called him Quiet Solomon, who worked in finance, and Camille had never bothered to elaborate on what that meant. What it meant was that Solomon Webb had spent 11 years helping federal agencies and private institutions trace money that people believed they had successfully hidden. Camille had moved through their joint accounts and his business transfers over 14 months, patient, deliberate, quiet, and she had taken $2 million and moved it directly to a man named Preston Harlow, who drove a Porsche Cayenne and held a penthouse lease in Midtown Atlanta and had been telling her, for the better part of a year, that her husband was the only thing standing between her and the life she deserved. What neither of them had stopped to ask was why Solomon's accounts were structured the way they were, or what compliance requirements applied to the federal settlement funds that ran through them. Every dollar she had taken was tagged. Every transfer she and Preston made with that money was automatically logged and reported to the agencies Solomon had spent his career working alongside. She had moved $2 million of the most traceable money in the state of Georgia. He had known this when she left. He had let her go. When federal investigators knocked on the door of Preston's Midtown penthouse, 72 hours after the final transfers cleared, Camille called Solomon 23 times in a single evening. The 24th call, he answered. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The apartment on Peachtree Battle Avenue had been theirs for 6 years before it became solely his, and Solomon had kept it with the same patient attention he brought to everything that mattered. He rose before 6 on weekdays and made coffee in the kitchen he had renovated during the first winter in the space. New countertops, new fixtures, a backsplash he had tiled himself from a pattern his mother Naomi had found in a design magazine, which he had cut by hand on 3 consecutive Saturdays while Camille was visiting her sister. It had taken longer to do it right than it would have taken to do it quickly. He had done it right. His mother was 76 now and still in the white clapboard house on the West End side of Atlanta, where she had raised him alone after his father passed when Solomon was 9. She kept a swept front porch and a green door and the particular dignity of a woman who had worked 31 years as a loan officer at a community institution and had approved mortgages for families the larger banks would not see. She called every Sunday at 8, she said what she meant. She had told Solomon 2 years before the marriage ended that something in Camille's manner had shifted, and she had said it once and not returned to it because Naomi Webb did not repeat herself. Her principle about money she had offered early in Solomon's career, standing at her kitchen counter with the flat, no-ceremony tone of a woman stating fact, money tells you who a person is. You just have to know where to look. He had built 11 years of work on the truth of that. He had met Camille at a compliance seminar in Houston in 2014. She worked in corporate risk management, and she asked the best questions in the room. Precise, unafraid. The questions of someone who already understood the answers and wanted to see how the presenter handled them. He had introduced himself over coffee afterward, and she had laughed at something unremarkable he said, genuinely and surprised out of herself. And he had thought, standing in a conference center on a rainy Houston Thursday, that he had never met someone who paid attention the way she did. They had dated 18 months, married in May, moved into the Peachtree Battle apartment the following winter. For most of those 8 years, the life they were building had felt like the right one. His professional accounts had always been structured through his firm's compliance architecture, mandatory given the nature of his federal contracts. He managed financial intelligence work for 3 ongoing agency relationships, and the settlement funds that flowed through his accounts were subject to automatic suspicious activity report filings at any transfer above a specific threshold. He had explained this to Camille once early in the marriage, when she had asked why his accounts were organized the way they were. She had not retained that information. He kept a second phone in the locked center drawer of his desk, a work device connected to monitoring software he ran on behalf of his agency clients. He had set the same alert on his own accounts 2 years into the marriage, not because he suspected anything specific, but because Solomon Webb had spent enough time in financial crimes to understand that trust and verification were not the same instrument, and that maintaining the second one cost him nothing, He was finishing his second cup of coffee on a Tuesday morning in March when the alert fired. The numbers were talking. They always were, for someone who knew how to listen. The alert was a transfer flag. $240,000 had moved out of the joint business account overnight to an external account he did not recognize, under a corporate name he had never seen. He did not reach for his personal phone. He opened the monitoring software on his work device and ran the receiving account through standard search protocols. It had been opened 11 weeks earlier. The registered business name was a shell entity incorporated in Delaware. The registered agent was a law firm Solomon recognized from prior casework as one that specialized in asset concealment for high-net-worth private clients. He sat with that for a moment, then he went back to the joint account and scrolled further. The $240,000 was not the beginning. It was the escalation. Over the preceding 14 months, 31 transfers had moved out of their accounts in amounts ranging from $8,000 to $73,000. The pattern was exactly what he trained institutions to recognize: staggered amounts, irregular intervals, a deliberate effort to stay beneath the thresholds that triggered automatic review. Someone had researched standard banking protocols. Someone had been careful. Not careful enough. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved through the documentation the way he moved through any investigation, methodically, without skipping steps, building from the known to the confirmed. He cross-referenced dates against his personal calendar. The transfers had begun 9 months after Camille started working more closely with the Harlow Group on a corporate risk contract. They had increased in frequency through the fall, around the time she had started coming home later, explaining the hours as project deadlines. He remembered those evenings. He had made dinner on most of them. He ran Preston Harlow through the firm's commercial database. The Harlow Group was a mid-sized development firm with 3 active projects in Midtown and a public record that revealed, on close examination, 2 civil suits settled quietly in 2019 and 2021, in a pattern of investor disputes that had never made the business press but had moved through civil court without resolution. Harlow himself was 44, drove a company Porsche, and maintained a residential lease on the top floor of a building he partly owned near Piedmont Park. He had no idea that his new financial partner's husband had built the systems used to catch people exactly like him. Solomon copied the commercial profile to a secure folder. He added the transfer records, the shell entity registration, the Delaware incorporation paperwork, and a running total. When he reached the final figure, he looked at it for a moment without expression. $2,074,000. He knew exactly what the compliance architecture around those accounts required. Every dollar was tagged to a reporting obligation he had personally structured when the federal contract was first awarded. Any transfer above $80,000 to an external entity triggered an automatic SAR filing at the originating bank. Camille had moved funds in amounts that suggested she had researched standard thresholds. She had researched the wrong thresholds. She had no idea those filings already existed. She had no idea the agency whose settlement funds she had moved through a Delaware shell entity was one Solomon consulted for directly. He went to the bedroom closet and took down the fireproof case from the upper shelf, the one Camille had asked about once, early in the marriage, and he had told her held professional documents. It did. He removed the compliance letter from the agency's general counsel, issued 3 years earlier, which described in precise legal language the criminal penalties applicable to the misappropriation of settlement-linked funds. He set it on his desk beside the legal pad. He opened a new folder on his laptop. He named it simply Camille. Then he reached for his second phone and made one call. "Patricia," he said quietly, "Monday morning, if you have the time." Patricia Ames had practiced family and asset law in Atlanta for 19 years, from a 4th-floor suite near Buckhead that had no reception desk, and she arrived at every meeting, having already read whatever had been sent to her twice. Solomon came Monday morning with the monitoring software documentation, the full transfer timeline, the shell entity records, and the compliance letter from the agency's general counsel. She read through everything without interrupting. When she finished, she set the compliance letter on top and looked at it for a long moment. "The SAR filings," she said, "have they been submitted?" 3 triggered automatically when the transfers cleared, Solomon said. "The 4th files in 30 days, and the agency is aware. They will be," he said, "within the standard review period." She picked up her pen, What she moved constitutes misappropriation of federally tagged funds. That is a criminal matter, independent of the divorce proceedings. She met his eyes steadily. You understand what that means for the timeline? He said that he did. The civil recovery, the transferred assets, the undisclosed accounts, the shell entity, that is straightforward documentation work. The criminal question is not ours to file. We document, we preserve, and we cooperate when the agency comes to us. A pause, and they will come. She set her pen down. Give me a week. At the door, she turned back once. The accounts, she said. Was the compliance structure properly disclosed in your original federal contract? It was documented in every filing, Solomon said. She nodded once. Good, because the documentation that protects the agency is the same documentation that protects you. She put her glasses back on. People underestimate paperwork. Paperwork outlasts everything. 4 days later, Solomon drove south to the white clapboard house on the West End side of Atlanta, where his mother had lived for 31 years. They sat at her kitchen table with coffee in the particular quality of silence that only existed between a mother and a son who had known each other fully for a long time. Naomi listened without asking questions until he was done. Then she sat with both hands around her mug and looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the backyard that his father had planted the year Solomon was born. 37 years old now, well over 40 feet, showing no inclination to be anywhere else. Did you know, she said, before she left, did you know what she was building? He considered it honestly. The numbers told me something was off about 8 months ago. I couldn't prove it yet. Naomi nodded slowly, the nod of a woman who was not surprised. Your father used to say that money doesn't lie, she said. People lie about money. The money itself always tells the truth. She looked at her son directly. You let her show you exactly who she was. That took patience. I don't know I would have had. I needed the full picture, Solomon said. Something in her expression settled into the particular piece of a mother who has watched her child become exactly who she raised him to be. You have it now, she said. Patricia called Thursday afternoon. The forensic accountant she had retained had followed the trail of the $2.07 million through 4 subsequent transfers, from the Delaware shell into an operating account in Harlow's firm, then split between 2 investment vehicles registered to a holding company he controlled, then into real estate positions that had closed in the preceding 30 days. The structure was sophisticated for a first attempt. It was not sophisticated enough. The SAR filings on record traced the origin funds directly back to the federal settlement account. Patricia said, every institution that has touched that money downstream is going to receive an inquiry. Harlow's own bank flagged the deposits 3 days ago and filed their own SAR yesterday. A pause. He does not have the infrastructure to absorb what is coming. The investment vehicles Harlow had used to park the money were connected through 2 layers of corporate structure to a midtown construction project with 3 institutional investors. Those investors had compliance departments. Those compliance departments were about to receive notifications from their banking partners that would require disclosure. The questions that followed would be ones Harlow could not answer without implicating himself further. The money he believed he was gaining, Patricia said, is in the process of becoming the most expensive asset he has ever held. She told Solomon to stay available. This kind of thing moved faster than a divorce. That evening, Camille called from the number associated with Harlow's building. Solomon looked at the screen for 2 full rings. He let it go to voicemail. She left nothing. He made dinner at the kitchen table, a quiet meal for no audience but himself, and ate it with a technical brief open beside him, in the particular stillness of a man who has nothing left to wait for. Start at the beginning, he thought. Rinsing the dishes. Don't skip steps. The system does what it was built to do. He turned out the kitchen light and went to bed. The call started at 9:47 the following Thursday evening. Solomon was at his desk when the first came in. He looked at the screen, set the phone face up on the desk, and went back to the document he was reviewing. The second call came 4 minutes later. The third, 6 after that. He made notes in the margin of the document. He refilled his water glass. He returned to the desk. By the 21st call, it was past midnight. He had turned off the lamp and was sitting in the dark with the stillness of a man who has waited a long time for something and has just watched it arrive precisely where he expected it. The 23rd call ended at 12:42. He set the phone flat on the desk. The 24th came at 12:49. He picked it up on the second ring. "Camille," he said. The sound on the other end was not quite crying. It was the specific unraveling of a person who had been certain of something for a long time and had just been told with finality they were wrong. "There were investigators," she said, "federal investigators, at Preston's building. They had documents. They had account records. They wanted to speak with her. She needed him to explain. She needed him to make a call. Could he call someone? Could he please make this stop?" Solomon listened until she finished. Then he was quiet for a moment. "The transfers triggered 3 SAR filings," he said. "The first cleared 11 days after you moved the initial amount. The second filed 18 days later. The third was automatic, threshold-based, nothing personal. The system doing what it was designed to do." He paused. "A fourth closes in 3 weeks. Silence on the other end. The accounts you pulled from were tied to a federal settlement fund from a financial crimes case I consulted on in 2019. He continued, in the same voice he used for everything. "Those funds carry mandatory AML reporting requirements under 2 separate federal statutes. Any transfer above $80,000 to an external entity triggers automatic review. You moved the money in amounts that suggested you had researched standard banking thresholds. He let that land. You researched the wrong thresholds." She said she hadn't known. She said she loved him. She said it had been a mistake, that if he would just speak to someone, just make one call, "Get a criminal defense attorney in the morning," he said. "Not a divorce attorney. Criminal defense. Call first thing." A pause. "I'm going to go to bed now." He sat in the dark for a moment, with the particular stillness of a man who has been carrying considerable weight for a long time and has finally been permitted to set it down. Outside, Atlanta was conducting its ordinary midnight business, completely indifferent to what had just been resolved in the room he was sitting in. Real power, he thought, operated in quiet rooms. He had known that for a long time. He turned out the last light and went to bed. There was a meeting the following morning at Patricia's office. Preston Harlow arrived with 2 attorneys and the controlled expression of a man still calculating odds. His attorneys made the opening argument: good faith transactions, third-party liability, a proposed framework for expedited restitution. They used the kind of language that sounded reasonable until you examined what it was being applied to. Patricia let them finish. Then she opened her folder and began. The 3 SAR filings on record. The agency's official inquiry notification received that same morning. The downstream institutional flags from Harlow's own bank. The investment vehicle documentation. $2 million of federally tagged funds parked in positions carrying civil and criminal exposure. The compliance letter from the agency's general counsel with the applicable statutes and penalties. She set each document down one at a time. She did not rush. Harlow's expression moved through 3 distinct stages: controlled confidence, active recalculation, and the specific stillness of a man who has finally understood the shape of the room he is sitting in and recognized it was built for him precisely. Solomon sat at the far end of the table and said nothing throughout. He had nothing to add. Patricia had the documents. The documents had everything. "We would recommend your clients speak with different counsel before the next meeting," Patricia said. "Criminal defense counsel, specifically." Harlow looked at Solomon for the first time since sitting down. The look of a man who had believed for a long time that he was the most formidable thing in any room he chose to enter, and had just quietly revised that assessment. Solomon stood, gathered his copies, shook Patricia's hand, and walked out. 8 months passed like a long exhale after years of held breath. The federal investigation moved at the measured pace of federal things. The SAR filings had been reviewed, escalated, and formally referred to the agency's enforcement division by February. Harlow's development firm entered into a consent agreement that froze the investment vehicles and mandated full restitution of the $2 million to the originating settlement account. His Midtown construction project had been suspended pending the institutional investor disclosures. His 2 attorneys were very busy. Camille had retained criminal defense counsel the morning after the phone call. As Solomon had recommended, her cooperation with the federal investigation was partial and ongoing. Her corporate risk management position had been vacated by mutual agreement with her firm 10 days after the agency inquiry became known to her employer. She was doing independent consulting now, the kind of work available when institutional doors had closed and the professional referral network had gone quiet. Solomon heard these details from Patricia, delivered once and without elaboration. In the same flat, factual tone Patricia used for everything, he registered them and moved on. In April, he accepted an offer he had been considering for 2 years, a senior advisory role at a financial intelligence firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. He came to Atlanta for 2 weeks every month and was in the capital for the rest. He had kept the apartment on Peachtree Battle. He had refinished the deck himself the weekend before his first trip north, in the unhurried way of a man maintaining something he intended to keep. He had met Anita Graves at a regulatory policy conference in February, a financial intelligence specialist who asked the kind of questions that assumed you had already considered the answer. They had dinner 3 times before either of them named what was happening. On the third dinner, he had told her plainly what the preceding year had held. She had listened without filling the silence afterward, which told him almost everything he needed to know about her. On a Sunday morning in September, he was on the refinished deck with his first cup of coffee, and the particular quality of quiet that came from a life arranged with deliberate care, with nothing in it that hadn't earned its place. His mother had called at 8, as she always did. He had answered on the first ring, as he always did. "Money tells you who a person is," she had said once. "You just have to know where to look." He had looked. He had found what was there. He had built carefully from what remained. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.